The sky above Sarath 4 burned orange and red as another explosion lit up the horizon. Ambassador Tyrell stood at the window of the emergency bunker and watched his world die. The Volanthi Elder pressed his four-fingered hand against the cold glass as enemy ships continued their bombardment from orbit. Behind him, hundreds of his people huddled together in fear. Children cried into their mothers' arms. Elders whispered prayers to gods who seemed to have abandoned them. The air recyclers hummed loudly, struggling to filter out the smoke that seeped through every crack in the old shelter. "Ambassador," his aide Sarath said, her voice shaking. "The defense fleet has fallen. All 12 ships are gone." Tyrell closed his large eyes and lowered his head. 12 ships against 200. They had known it was hopeless from the start, but the brave crews had fought anyway. Now they were dust and debris floating in the void above their world. The Corax Dominion had come without warning. Their massive warships had appeared at the edge of the system 3 days ago. They sent no demands, no ultimatums, no offers of surrender. The Corax did not negotiate with species they considered inferior. They simply took what they wanted, and what they wanted was everything. Tyrell had seen recordings of other worlds the Corax had conquered. The survivors were processed, sorted, and shipped to labor camps across the Dominion. Families were separated. Children were taken to indoctrination centers. The old and the sick were simply eliminated. The Corax had no use for those who could not work. "There must be something we can do," Sarath whispered. "Someone we can call for help." Tyrell turned away from the window and looked at the emergency communication console in the corner of the room. There was one option left, one signal he could send. But the Galactic Assembly had warned all member species never to make contact with them. The humans. Tyrell had studied the reports about humanity. They were a young species from a harsh world called Earth. They had only achieved faster than light travel 50 years ago. Yet in that short time, they had built a military force that made even the Corax nervous. The Assembly called humans dangerous, unpredictable, and violent. They said humanity could not be trusted. But Tyrell had also heard other stories. Whispered tales of human ships appearing when other species sent distress calls. Stories of human soldiers fighting and dying for people they had never met. Some said the humans were monsters. Others said they were the galaxy's last hope when all other hope had failed. Another explosion shook the bunker. Dust fell from the ceiling. A child screamed somewhere in the crowd. Behind him, Tyrell made his decision. He walked to the communication console and entered a frequency that no Volanthi had ever used before. His hands trembled as he activated the emergency beacon. The signal would travel across the sector, carrying a simple message. "Help us. Please. Ambassador, what have you done?" Sarath asked, her eyes wide with fear. "I have done the only thing I can," Tyrell replied. "I have asked for a miracle." 12 light years away, the human carrier USS Relentless cruised through empty space on a routine patrol mission. Commander Hannah Price sat in her chair on the bridge, reviewing supply reports on her datapad. At 43 years old, she had served in the Navy for over 2 decades. Her brown hair was cut short for practical reasons, and her blue eyes carried the tired look of someone who had seen too many battles. "Commander," the communications officer said suddenly, "we are receiving a distress signal." Price looked up from her reports. "Source?" "A planet called Sarath 4, Volanthi Colony World. They are under attack by the Corax Dominion." Price set down her datapad. The Volanthi were not allies of Earth. They had no treaty, no trade agreements, nothing that would require human intervention. In fact, the Volanthi government had publicly supported the Assembly's decision to limit contact with humanity. "How far?" she asked. 6 hours at maximum speed." The executive officer, Commander Lucas Perry, leaned closer to Price. "Ma'am, We have no obligation to respond. The Volanthi have never done anything for us. And engaging the Corax without authorization could create a political incident. Price nodded slowly. He was right. The smart thing to do was to log the signal and continue their patrol. Someone else could deal with the Volanthi problem. It was not their fight. She looked at the main screen, where the distress signal played on repeat. The voice was filled with fear and desperation. Somewhere out there, people were dying, and they were begging for anyone to save them. Navigation, Price said. Set course for Seraph 4, maximum speed. Perry's eyes widened. Commander, are you sure about this? Those people are asking for help, Price said simply. We are going to help them. She stood and walked to the intercom panel. All hands, this is Commander Price. We are responding to a distress call from a Volanthi colony under Corax attack. I need all combat personnel ready for deployment in 6 hours. Marine units, prepare for ground operations. In the barracks below, Sergeant Daniel Cruz looked up from the letter he had been writing to his mother back on Earth. He was 30 years old, with dark hair and the weathered face of a man who had spent too many years in combat zones. When the commander's announcement ended, he folded the letter and put it in his pocket. Lieutenant Katie Shaw, the platoon commander, appeared in the doorway. She was younger than Cruz, only 26, but she had already earned the respect of everyone in the unit. You heard the commander, she said. Get your squad ready. Cruz nodded and began gathering his equipment. Around him, other Marines did the same. They moved with quiet efficiency, checking weapons and armor without complaint. None of them asked why they were going to save aliens they had never met. They were Marines. This was what they did. 6 hours later, the USS Relentless dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Ceres system. On the bridge, Commander Price stared at the tactical display. 200 Corax warships surrounded the planet. Troop transports were already descending to the surface. They have a lot of ships, Perry said quietly. Yes, they do, Price agreed. She pressed the intercom button. Marine units, begin launch sequence. You are cleared for orbital insertion. In his dropship, Sergeant Cruz felt the engines roar to life. Through the small window, he could see the burning planet below. Somewhere down there, innocent people were waiting for help. 30 seconds to atmosphere entry. The pilot announced. Cruz checked his rifle one final time. Beside him, Private Olivia Grant, the squad's medic, was whispering a prayer. Corporal Eddie Vance was cracking his knuckles. The rest of the squad sat in tense silence. The dropship began to shake as it entered the atmosphere. Fire surrounded them. Cruz closed his eyes and thought about the letter in his pocket. He hoped he would get the chance to finish it. Below them, Ambassador Tyrell looked up at the sky and saw streaks of fire cutting through the clouds. At first, he thought it was more enemy bombardment. Then his communication console crackled to life. Volanthi Kali, this is Commander Hannah Price of the USS Relentless. Hold on, help is coming. For the first time in 3 days, Tyrell felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. The human reinforcement fleet arrived like angels of vengeance, cutting through the darkness of space. 12 battleships, 20 cruisers, and 50 destroyers dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. At their head flew the flagship USS Liberty, carrying Admiral Robert Hayes and the full might of the Earth. Alliance Third Fleet. Admiral Hayes looked at the tactical display and felt his jaw tighten with anger. The Relentless was barely holding together, her hull covered in wounds, her engines flickering with failing power. But she was still there, still positioned between the Corax fleet and the planet below. Commander Price, Hayes said through the communication channel, you can stand down now. We will take it from here. Price's voice came back tired but steady. Understood, Admiral. It is good to see friendly faces. Hayes turned to his weapons officer. All ships, engage the enemy fleet. No mercy. The battle that followed was swift and brutal. The Corax had expected to face a single damaged carrier, not a full battle fleet. Their formation broke under the human assault. Ship after ship fell to human weapons, their gray hulls splitting open and spilling debris into the void. Fleet Commander Gorath watched from his command ship as his fleet crumbled around him. He had underestimated the humans. He had thought them weak, soft, unable to match Corax might. He had been catastrophically wrong. "Order the retreat," he said, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. "All ships, withdraw from the system." The surviving Corax vessels turned and fled, their engines burning at maximum power as they raced toward the edge of the system. The humans pursued for a while, destroying stragglers, but eventually let them go. The planet was safe. That was what mattered. On the surface, the Corax ground forces received word of the fleet's defeat. Without orbital support, without their command structure, they were stranded on a hostile world with no hope of victory. One by one, they began to surrender. Lieutenant Shaw stood in the central plaza as Corax. Soldiers dropped their weapons and knelt before the Marine positions. She had never expected to see this. The mighty Corax, conquerors of 100 worlds, brought low by a force, a fraction of their size dot around her. Volanthi civilians emerged from hiding. They stared at the surrendering enemy with a mixture of disbelief and dawning hope. Children, who had been crying for days, began to laugh. Families who had been separated during the invasion ran to find each other. Sergeant Cruz was carried into the plaza on a stretcher, the Volanthi child still holding his hand. Private Grant rushed to his side and began examining his wound. It was serious, but he would live. The stubborn fool had survived after all. "Someone finish my letter for me," Cruz mumbled through the pain medication. "Tell my mom I am okay." "Tell her yourself," Grant replied, a rare smile crossing her tired face. "You are going home, Daniel." Ambassador Tyrell walked to the plaza, taking in the scene around him. Marine medics were treating wounded Volanthi alongside their own soldiers. Human engineers were working to restore power to the city's emergency systems. Everywhere he looked, he saw humans helping, protecting, healing. He found Lieutenant Shaw standing at the edge of the plaza, staring at the sky where the last traces of battle still flickered. She looked exhausted, her armor dented and scorched, her face smeared with dust and dried blood. "Lieutenant," Tyrell said softly, "I must ask you something." Shaw turned to face him. "Go ahead. We are strangers to you. We rejected your offers of friendship. We listened to the Galactic Assembly when they called you dangerous. We have done nothing to earn your protection." Tyrell spread his four hands in a gesture of confusion. "Why did you sacrifice so much for us? What do humans gain from this?" Shaw was quiet for a long moment. She thought about the 63 Marines who had died on this world. She thought about the Relentless still burning in orbit, her crew finally being evacuated to safety. She thought about Commander Price, who had held her ship together through sheer force of will until help arrived. "When I was a child," Shaw finally said, "my grandmother told me a story. She said that strength without compassion is just cruelty wearing a different mask. She said that the true measure of a person is not how they treat those who can help them, but how they treat those who cannot." She looked at the Volanthi families reuniting around them, at the children laughing for the first time in days, at her wounded Marines being carried to safety by grateful civilians. "We did not come here because you could help us," Shaw continued. "We came because you needed help. That is what humans do. That is who we choose to be." Tyrell bowed his head, a gesture of deep respect among his people. Then the Galactic Assembly was right about one thing. Humans are dangerous. Dangerous to those who prey upon the weak. Dangerous to those who believe might makes right. He looked up at Shaw with something like reverence in his large eyes. And perhaps that is exactly what this galaxy needs. 3 months later, the Volante government formally petitioned to join the Earth Alliance. The ceremony was held on the steps of the rebuilt Capitol building in Virith Prime, attended by representatives from both species and broadcast across the galaxy. Ambassador Tyrell stood at the podium, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. We were told that humans were violent and unpredictable. We were told to fear them. But when our world burned and our people cried for help, humans were the only ones who answered. They fought and died for strangers. They protected our children with their own bodies. They showed us that true strength is not measured in weapons or ships, but in the courage to stand for what is right. He turned to look at the human delegation, where Lieutenant Shaw stood in her dress uniform, still bearing scars from the battle. The Earth Alliance did not ask for payment. They did not demand territory or resources. They asked only that we remember. And we will. For as long as our species exists, we will remember the day that humans came through the smoke to save us. Across the galaxy, other species watched the ceremony with growing interest. For centuries, the Galactic Assembly had painted humanity as dangerous outsiders to be avoided. But now, a different picture was emerging. Stories spread from Sareth 4 to 1,000 other worlds. Stories of human courage, human sacrifice, human compassion. Within the year, 17 more species had sent messages toward Earth. Not warnings, not threats, requests for friendship. In her office on the Relentless, finally repaired and returned to service, Commander Price read the latest diplomatic reports with a small smile on her face. The galaxy was changing. Fear was slowly being replaced by something else. Something better. Her communication console beeped with an incoming message. Another distress signal from another world. Another species begging for help against forces they could not defeat alone. Price did not hesitate. Navigation, she ordered. Set course for the signal origin. Maximum speed. The humans were coming. And this time, the galaxy was beginning to understand what that meant. Hope. The bunker held 43 survivors. Most of them were children and elderly. A few adults had stayed behind to protect them when the Hollow attacked. They had sealed themselves inside and waited for death or rescue. Jake was the first through the door. Keth Varn watched as the human squad leader knelt down to meet the eyes of a small girl who stood frozen in fear. The child could not have been more than 6 years old. Her face was dirty with tears. "Hey there," Jake said softly. "My name is Jake. We're here to help you. You're safe now." The girl stared at him for a long moment. Then she threw herself into his arms and sobbed. Jake held her gently, one hand on her back, his weapon still ready in the other. Keth Varn found this behavior inefficient. They were in hostile territory. Every second spent comforting children was a second not spent on the mission. The Hollow Nest was still out there. That was the objective. "Sergeant Hartley," Keth Varn said, "the mission is to locate and destroy the Hollow Nest. These civilians are not our responsibility." Jake looked up at him. There was something cold in his eyes now. Something that made Keth Varn pause despite himself. "The mission just changed," Jake said. "These people are the mission now. That is not what Command ordered. Then Command can come down here and tell these kids themselves." Jake stood up, the girl still clinging to his leg. "We protect the innocent. That's what we do. That's who we are." Lisa moved past Keth Varn to check on the survivors. Danny and Beth took positions at the bunker entrance, watching for Hollow movement. They did not question Jake's decision. They simply followed. Keth Varn did not understand this. The logical choice was to continue the mission. The Hollow Nest was the source of the infestation. Destroy the nest, and the drones would become disorganized. The colony could be saved. These 43 people were a small number compared to the thousands Who would die if the hollow spread? But the humans did not think this way. They saw the people in front of them and could not walk away. That it was irrational. It was inefficient. It was very human. We need to fortify this position, Jake announced. Lisa, check our supplies. Beth, find the best sniper positions. Danny, help me seal the secondary entrances. What about the nest? Kath Voren asked. The nest can wait. Reinforcements are 18 hours out. We hold this position until they arrive. Kath Voren calculated the odds. The hollow had detected human life in the colony. They would come in force. The bunker was defensible, but against a sustained assault, 5 soldiers could not hold for 18 hours. The probability of survival is less than 12%, Kath Voren stated. Jake smiled grimly. Then we'll have to be in that 12%. Lisa approached Kath Voren as the others worked. You think we're making a mistake. I think you are allowing emotion to override logic, maybe. Lisa looked at the children huddled in the corner of the bunker. An old woman was trying to calm them, singing a soft song. But those kids didn't ask for this. They didn't choose to be born on a colony in hollow territory. They just want to live. Everyone wants to live. That does not change tactical reality. Lisa turned to face him directly. You really don't feel it, do you? You look at those kids and feel nothing. Kath Voren considered the question. He looked at the children. They were small, helpless, afraid. Their eyes were wide with terror. Some of them were crying silently, too exhausted for sound. He felt nothing. They were simply organisms facing termination. It was unfortunate, but not emotionally significant. I feel nothing, he confirmed. Lisa shook her head. Then you're missing the whole point of being alive. She walked away to continue her work. Kath Voren did not understand her words. What was the point of being alive, if not to serve one's purpose? He was a warrior. His purpose was to fight and win. Everything else was irrelevant. The first hollow assault came 2 hours later. They poured out of the destroyed buildings like a dark wave. Dozens of drones moving with terrible speed toward the bunker. The humans opened fire from their positions. Kath Voren moved to the front line and met the charge directly. He was faster than the hollow, stronger. His blade cut through them like they were made of paper. His plasma pistol dropped them at range. In minutes, the first wave was broken, but more came. The second wave was larger. The third larger still. The hollow were testing their defenses, probing for weaknesses. Kath Voren fought without pause. His body was designed for this. He did not tire. He did not slow down. The humans were different. They rotated positions, taking turns to rest. They covered each other with precise fire. When a hollow broke through, they moved to intercept as a team. Danny was on the east wall when 3 drones flanked his position. Kath Voren saw him freeze for a moment, fear visible on his face. But then the young soldier moved. He dropped the first drone with a burst of fire. The second fell to his knife. The third would have killed him if not for Beth. Her shot came from across the bunker, threading through a narrow gap in the debris. It hit the drone exactly in its weak point. The creature fell dead at Danny's feet. Thanks, Danny called out, his voice shaking. Focus, Beth replied. But there was warmth in her tone. Relief. Kath Voren observed this exchange with growing confusion. They were afraid. All of them were afraid. He could see it in their movements, hear it in their voices. And yet they fought. They protected each other. They refused to give up. The assault continued through the night. Kath Voren lost count of how many hollow he killed. His blade grew dull. His ammunition ran low. For the first time in many battles, he felt his body growing tired. A hollow drone caught him with a poisoned tendril. The toxin burned through his system, slowing his regeneration. He stumbled, and 3 more drones closed in. Then Jake was there. The human squad leader grabbed Kethvorin by the arm and dragged him back while firing his weapon one-handed. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It made no logical sense. Why? Kethvorin managed to ask. "You're part of my squad now," Jake replied. "We don't leave anyone behind." They made it back to the bunker. Lisa injected Kethvorin with something that helped fight the toxin. Around them, the battle continued. But for a moment, everything seemed to slow down. Kethvorin looked at these humans. They were tired. They were wounded. They were afraid. And they were still fighting. Not for glory. Not for victory. But for each other. For the children behind them. For something they believed in. He felt a strange pressure in his chest. Not pain, something else. Something he had never felt before. He did not know what it was. But when the next wave came, he stood with the humans and fought shoulder dash to dash shoulder dot, and for the first time, he understood that some things were worth fighting for even when you could not win. Kethvorin had fought in 37 campaigns across the galaxy. He had faced enemies that could melt flesh with a single touch. He had walked through battlefields covered with the dead. He had never once felt what other species called fear. The Valdris did not know fear. It was not part of their nature. Their bodies could heal from almost any wound. Their minds were built for war. They lived for centuries, and death in battle was simply the end of service. There was nothing to be afraid of. This was why Kethvorin found humans so strange. He stood in the transport ship, looking at the 4 human soldiers assigned to his squad. They were small compared to him. Their skin was soft. They could not regenerate. A wound that would heal on a Valdris body in hours would kill a human in minutes. And yet, here they were, preparing for war against the Hollow. The Hollow were a hive-mind species that consumed everything in their path. They had already eaten 3 worlds in this sector. Now they were on Arion 4, and the Galactic Council had sent a joint force of Valdris and humans to stop them. Kethvorin did not understand why humans were included. They were fragile. They lived short lives. They felt fear. How could such creatures be useful in battle? The squad leader was a man named Jake Hartley. He had brown hair cut short and calm eyes that seemed to notice everything. He was cleaning his weapon when he looked up at Kethvorin. "You must be our Valdris commander," Jake said. He smiled. "Welcome to the team." Kethvorin gave a short nod. "I am Kethvorin. I have studied your combat records. They are acceptable." Jake laughed softly. "Acceptable. I'll take that as a compliment." The other humans introduced themselves. Lisa Monroe was the medic and explosives expert. She had red hair tied back and sharp eyes that seemed to judge everything they saw. Danny Vega was young, maybe 20 human years, with nervous energy in every movement. Beth Sawyer was the sniper. She was quiet and still, watching Kethvorin with careful attention. "First time working with Valdris," Lisa said. "They say you don't feel fear. Is that true?" "It is true," Kethvorin replied. "Fear is not part of Valdris biology. We do not understand it." "Must be nice," Danny said. His voice was light, but Kethvorin could see tension in his shoulders. The young human was afraid. He was going into battle, and he was afraid. Kethvorin found this troubling. Why would any military send soldiers who felt fear into combat? Fear made you hesitate. Fear made you weak. Fear got you killed. The transport shook as it entered the atmosphere of Arion 4. Through the small window, Kethvorin could see the planet below. It had once been green and blue. Now large parts of it were gray and black where the Hollow had consumed everything. "Command says the Hollow presence is worse than expected," Jake announced, reading from his tactical display. "They've spread faster than our scouts predicted. The colony were heading to went dark 6 hours ago. Survivors? Beth asked quietly. Unknown. Our mission is to assess the situation and locate the hollow nest. If we find survivors, we protect them until reinforcements arrive. Cathvoren noted that Jake had said, if we find survivors with the same weight as locate the hollow nest. To him, these should not be equal priorities. The mission objective was the nest. Survivors were secondary, but he said nothing. He would observe these humans and learn how they operated. The transport landed hard on a damaged landing pad. The squad moved out quickly, weapons ready. Cathvoren took point, his larger body and faster reflexes making him the obvious choice for first contact. The colony was silent. Buildings stood empty with doors hanging open. Personal belongings were scattered on the ground, as if people had dropped everything and run. There were no bodies. The hollow did not leave bodies. They consumed everything. This is wrong, Ganny whispered. His weapon shook slightly in his hands. Cathvoren observed him with clinical interest. The young human was experiencing fear. His heart rate would be elevated. His palms would be sweating. His mind would be telling him to run. And yet, Danny kept moving forward with the squad. Why? What made him continue when every instinct told him to flee? Jake moved up beside Danny and put a hand on his shoulder. The young soldier looked at his squad leader with wide eyes. Fear keeps you alive, Jake said quietly. Use it. Cathvoren did not understand this. How could fear keep you alive? Fear made you slow. Fear made you stupid. Fear was a weakness to be eliminated. Not used. Lisa caught him watching the exchange. You think he's weak, she said. It was not a question. He is afraid, Cathvoren replied. Fear is weakness. Lisa shook her head. Fear means he has something to lose. Something worth fighting for. That's not weakness, Valdris. That's what makes us dangerous. Before Cathvoren could respond, movement ahead caught his attention. 3 hollow drones emerged from a building. They were twisted shapes of consumed flesh and dark matter, moving with unnatural speed. Cathvoren was faster. He closed the distance in 3 steps and cut through the first drone with his blade. The second fell to his plasma pistol. The third tried to flee and died with Beth's bullet in its center mass. Efficient, Jake commented. Cathvoren looked back at the squad. They had taken defensive positions, covering each other, watching all angles. They moved as one unit, each trusting the others to do their part. It was not impressive. It was just teamwork. Any squad could do this, but something about the way they looked at each other gave Cathvoren pause. There was a connection between them that went beyond military training. They cared about each other. They were afraid for each other. He filed this observation away for a later analysis. The squad moved deeper into the colony. The hollow presence grew stronger. More drones appeared, and more fell to their combined fire. Cathvoren noted that the humans fought differently than Valdris. They were more cautious, using cover, never exposing themselves unnecessarily. At first, he thought this was cowardice. Then, he realized it was something else. They were preserving themselves not out of fear of death, but because their deaths would hurt the others. They protected themselves to protect each other. It was a strange kind of logic. Valdris did not think this way. As they approached the center of the colony, Jake held up a fist. The squad stopped. Ahead, Cathvoren could see a bunker door, slightly open. And he could hear something from inside. Voices. Human voices. Children crying. Survivors. Jake looked at the squad, and something changed in his eyes. Something hard and determined that Cathvoren could not name. New priority, Jake said. We protect these people. Cathvoren felt something strange in his chest. Not fear. He did not know fear. But something else. something that told him this mission had just become far more complicated and far more dangerous. The night stretched on forever. Wave after wave of hollow drones crashed against their defenses. Ket Vorn fought until his arms burned with exhaustion. The toxin in his system had slowed his regeneration to almost nothing. Wounds that should have healed in minutes now stayed open and bleeding. He had never felt so vulnerable around him. The humans fought with a desperation he had never seen before. Jake held the main entrance, his rifle never stopping. Lisa moved between positions, treating wounds and planting explosive charges at key points. Beth took shot after shot from her elevated position, each one finding its mark. Danny held a corridor alone when the hollow broke through the eastern wall. Ket Vorn saw the young soldier standing against the tide of darkness, his face twisted with terror, his hands shaking on his weapon. Danny was afraid, more afraid than Ket Vorn had ever seen anyone be. But he did not run. He fired. He screamed. He fought Dot, and when it was over, Danny stood among the bodies of a dozen hollow drones. Still shaking, still alive. "Nice work," Jake said, appearing at Danny's side. Danny laughed, but there were tears in his eyes. "I thought I was going to die." "We all did," Jake replied. "That's what makes it matter." Ket Vorn did not understand this. How could the certainty of death make something matter more? For Valdris, death was simply the end. It had no special meaning. But for humans, it seemed to be something else entirely. The assault paused sometime after midnight. The Hollow were regrouping, preparing for a larger attack. In the silence, the squad gathered to assess their situation. "Ammunition is at 30%, Lisa reported. "Medical supplies are almost gone. We have maybe 6 more hours before we're fighting with knives and rocks. Reinforcements?" Beth asked. Jake shook his head. "Still 12 hours out. They can't move faster without exposing themselves to hollow interceptors." "So we hold," Danny said. His voice was steadier now. The fear was still there, but he had learned to carry it. Ket Vorn looked at the bunker door. Behind it, the survivors huddled together. The old woman had stopped singing. The children had finally fallen asleep, exhausted by terror. A young mother held her infant close, her eyes empty with shock. "We cannot hold for 12 hours, Ket Vorn said. "The math is simple. We will run out of ammunition. We will run out of energy. The Hollow will overwhelm us. Then we'll find another way," Jake said. "There is no other way." Jake looked at him with those steady eyes. "There's always another way. We just haven't found it yet." This was not logical. This was not rational. But Ket Vorn was beginning to realize that humans did not operate on logic alone. They operated on something else. Something stronger. Hope, faith, love. Words that the Valdris knew but did not truly understand. During the brief respite, Ket Vorn watched the humans interact with the survivors. Lisa sat with an injured elderly man, holding his hand and speaking softly. Beth showed a young boy how to hold a flashlight to help her clean her rifle. Jake carried sleeping children to more comfortable positions, moving with gentle care. Danny sat with a little girl who could not sleep. She was perhaps 5 years old, with dark hair and frightened eyes. Danny was talking to her quietly, making shapes with his hands in the light, creating shadow animals on the wall. The girl laughed. It was a small sound, fragile and brief. But it was laughter. Ket Vorn felt something twist in his chest. Not pain. Something else. "You care about them," he said to Jake. "All of them. The survivors. Your squad. You care." Jake nodded. "Of course I do. Why?" "You barely know them." Jake considered the question. "Because someone has to. Because they're people, and people deserve to be cared about. Because if we don't protect the innocent, then what are we even fighting for?" "Victory," survival, the destruction of the enemy. Those are goals, Jake said. They're not reasons. The reason we fight is right there. He pointed at the sleeping children. That's what we're protecting. Not territory. Not resources. Them. The Hollow attacked again before Kethvorin could respond. This wave was the largest yet. They came from all directions at once, crashing against the bunker like an ocean of darkness. The squad fought with everything they had. Kethvorin stood at the center, his blade moving in deadly arcs, his body pushed beyond any limit he had known before. Danny fell. A hollow tendril caught him across the chest, throwing him against a wall. He went down and did not get up. Lisa screamed his name and ran to him, leaving her position exposed. Kethvorin moved without thinking. He threw himself between Lisa and the hollow that lunged for her, taking the blow on his already wounded shoulder. The pain was incredible. His regeneration failed completely. Blood poured from the wound. But Lisa reached Danny. She pulled him to safety, already working on his wounds with desperate speed. "Stay with me," she begged. "Danny, stay with me." Kethvorin stood over them, fighting off every hollow that came close. His vision blurred. His strength faded. But he did not move. He could not move. If he moved, they would die. Jake appeared at his side, firing into the swarm. Beth joined them, her sniper rifle now used at close range. Together, they formed a wall between the wounded and the enemy. The assault broke. The hollow retreated, and in the sudden silence, Lisa looked up with tears on her face. "He'll live," she said. "Danny will live." Kethvorin felt his legs give out. He dropped to his knees beside Danny's unconscious form. The young soldier's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. He was alive. He would survive. And Kethvorin realized that the relief flooding through him was the most powerful thing he had ever felt. He did not want Danny to die. He did not want any of them to die. Somewhere in the long night, these fragile humans had become something to him. Something important. Something worth protecting. "You feel it now, don't you?" Jake said quietly, kneeling beside him. Kethvorin looked at the human squad leader. "I do not know what I feel." "Fear," Jake said. "You're afraid. Not of dying. You're afraid of losing them." Kethvorin looked at Lisa, still working on Danny. At Beth, reloading her rifle with steady hands. At the survivors behind them, who trusted these soldiers with their lives. Yes, he was afraid. For the first time in his existence, Kethvorin knew fear, and it did not make him weak. It made him understand what he was fighting for.